Gerald Holt leaned back in his chair, adjusted his silk tie, and disdainfully threw the file down onto the table. Looking straight at Marcus, he let out a laugh loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear.
Look at that, a black man in a cheap suit pretending to be a lawyer to sue a $4 billion corporation? How ridiculous! Your Honor, shouldn't we chip in a few $100s for him to buy a bus ticket home instead of wasting our time here?
The Vantage legal team snickered in agreement. Holt leaned forward, lowering his voice with a threatening and humiliating tone.
Listen, Webb, an inferior nobody like you had better go back to where you belong. Stealing my intellectual property? You don't even deserve to breathe the same air as me, let alone demand royalties. Hat technology belongs to me, and you won't get a single penny, you poor nigger.
Marcus Webb remained motionless. Not a single muscle on his face twitched. What they didn't know was that the man sitting alone at that table had been waiting 12 years for this exact moment, and he had come prepared. Want to see how a man with nothing destroys a $4 billion empire? Smash that follow button and watch part 2 right now. Chicago, 2012. The city in January is a particular kind of cold. Not the clean, quiet cold of open country, but a wet, bone-finding cold that comes off Lake Michigan and moves through a coat like the coat is not there. Marcus Webb had lived in Chicago his whole life, and he had never once made peace with January. But that winter, he barely noticed it. He was 32 years old, and he was building something. His desk at Vantage Technologies was on the 14th floor of a glass tower on West Adams Street, in an open-plan office that smelled of printer toner and microwave lunches, and the particular tension of people who were paid well enough to pretend they were not exhausted. Marcus sat near the back, by the window that looked north toward the river, and his monitor was always the last one still lit when the cleaners came through at 9. He did not stay late to be seen. He stayed because the work required it, and because the work was the only thing in that building that had never once made him feel like a guest. He had come to Vantage 4 years earlier, straight out of the University of Illinois, with a master's in computer engineering and a recommendation letter that his thesis advisor had called, in the old man's careful way, extraordinary. He had been hired as a mid-level software engineer, which was fair. He had expected, within 2 years, to move into a senior role. This was not arrogance. It was arithmetic. He looked at what the senior engineers around him were doing, and he looked at what he was doing, and the numbers did not lie to him the way some of the people in that building did. 2 years passed, then 3, then 4. In those 4 years, 2 men who had started the same quarter he had were promoted to team lead. Both of them were white. Both of them were competent, in the way that a solid lock is competent, functional, reliable, nothing that would stop you at the door. Marcus had trained one of them on data compression protocols in his first month. He had watched that man present the work in a meeting 6 weeks later, as though the concept had arrived in his own mind fully formed, and he had watched the room receive it with the easy confidence of people who expected ideas to come from that direction. Marcus had said nothing. He was learning the building. What he was building in private was something different. It had begun, as most serious things do, with a problem that no one else seemed to be losing sleep over. The medical record systems that hospitals used in those years were bloated, slow, and incompatible with each other in ways that cost real people real time. A trauma surgeon waiting on a patient's cardiac history from another facility was waiting on a system that had been designed in pieces by a dozen different vendors who had never spoken to one another. The data was all there. It just could not move. Marcus had started writing notes about it in a wire-bound notebook he kept in his desk drawer, the kind of notebook a man buys at a drugstore and does not expect to matter. He filled one, then another. He began writing code in the evenings, at home, on a second-hand laptop on the kitchen table of the apartment he shared with his girlfriend, Diane. The apartment was small, and the radiator knocked, and Diane would fall asleep on the couch with the television on, and Marcus would work until 2, sometimes 3 in the morning, not because anyone had asked him to, but because the problem would not let him go. What he was developing, over 18 months of evenings and weekends, was an algorithm, a compression and translation engine that could take medical data from incompatible systems and move it cleanly, quickly, without losing integrity. The core of it was a sequencing logic he had arrived at on his own. Working from first principles, the way a man works, a lock he has never seen before, not forcing it, but listening to it, turning it until it told him where it wanted to go. He had no name for it yet. He thought of it simply as the work. By the winter of 2012, the work was done. Or done enough to show. He had tested it 6 ways. He had stress-tested it against corrupted data sets and partial records, and the kind of edge case chaos that real hospital systems throw at software every day. It held every time. It held. He had documented everything: the logic, the code, the testing results in a file he kept on his personal drive and backed up twice, because he was, at his core, a careful man. The person he decided to show it to was Devin Sloan. Sloan was 45 that year, his direct supervisor, a product director with silver hair and a firm handshake, and the kind of easy confidence that comes from having never once walked into a room and wondered whether the room would accept him. He was not a bad man, Marcus had thought then. He was attentive in meetings. He remembered birthdays. He had a photograph of his 2 daughters on his desk, and he turned it slightly toward visitors, the way people do when they want you to know they are the kind of person who has daughters they love. Marcus had requested a meeting on a Tuesday afternoon. He had brought his laptop and his notebook and the 6 months of documentation. He had not been nervous, exactly. He had been careful, the way he was always careful with things that mattered. He walked Sloan through it for 40 minutes. Sloan asked 3 questions, all good ones, and Marcus answered them without hesitation. When he was finished, Sloan sat back in his chair and let out a slow breath and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then looked at Marcus with an expression that Marcus would spend a long time afterward trying to accurately name. "Marcus," Sloan said, "this is remarkable." He said it quietly, which was how Marcus knew he meant it. "I want to take this upstairs," Sloan said, "to Gerald directly. This is above my pay grade in the best possible way." He nodded at the documentation on the table between them. "Can you leave me the files? I'll need a few days to put together the right presentation." Marcus looked at the folder. He had worked 18 months for what was inside it. He had given up Saturdays and sleep and the easy evenings Diane had wanted and a vacation they had planned and canceled twice. He had tested it 6 ways, and it had held every time. "Of course," he said. He gathered his notebook and his laptop, and he left the files with Devin Sloan, and he walked back to his desk by the north-facing window, and he felt, for the first time in 4 years at Vantage Technologies, something that was dangerously close to hope. He would spend a long time after wishing he had not left the files. He would spend longer wishing he had known then that hope in that building flowed in one direction only. 6 weeks later, Marcus Webb was called into HR on a Thursday morning and handed a letter. The woman who handed it to him was named Carol, and she had kind eyes and a practiced expression that had learned, over many years of delivering bad news, how to look like sympathy without quite committing to it. She told him that Vantage was undergoing a structural reorganization. She told him that his position, along with several others, was being eliminated. She told him the decision was not a reflection of his performance. She did not look at him when she said that last part. He was given 30 minutes to collect his belongings. A man from building security stood in the hallway outside HR, not blocking the door, just present, the way a shadow is present. Marcus took his wire-bound notebooks from the desk drawer. He took the photograph of Diane. He left the coffee mug because it had the Vantage logo on it and it had never felt like his anyway. He did not speak to anyone on the floor as he left, because there was no one left to speak to. The open plan office was half empty that morning, and the people who were there studied their screens with the focused intensity of people who have just been reminded that they could be next. He walked out into a January that was somehow colder than the one before it, and stood on West Adams Street with a cardboard box under his arm and the letter folded in his coat pocket, and he stood there long enough for 2 cabs to slow down thinking he wanted a ride, and then he started walking north, because he did not yet know what else to do. He had worked at Vantage for 4 years and 4 months. He had left Devin Sloan his files 6 weeks ago. He told himself, walking, that the 2 things were not connected. He told himself that restructurings happened, that timing was sometimes only timing, that a company the size of Vantage did not need to fire 1 mid-level engineer to steal an algorithm it could simply have bought from him for a number that would have changed his life. He told himself these things for approximately 3 weeks. Then Vantage held a press conference. He watched it on his laptop in the apartment, still in the clothes he had slept in, a cup of coffee going cold beside him. Gerald Holt stood at a podium in the Vantage atrium with the particular ease of a man who has stood at podiums his entire adult life and knows how the light falls. Beside him, Devin Sloan stood with his hands clasped in front of him, and a smile that managed to be modest and triumphant at the same time. Holt called it a breakthrough. He said Vantage was proud to announce the Sloan Tech Compression Engine, a proprietary medical data translation algorithm that would, he said, transform how hospitals communicated across systems. He said it was the result of years of dedicated research and development. He said Devin Sloan was the kind of visionary that Vantage existed to nurture. Sloan said a few words. He thanked the team. He thanked Gerald. He said that some problems were so important that a person simply could not stop thinking about them until they were solved. Marcus watched Sloan say this. He sat very still. On the screen, a reporter asked how the algorithm worked, and Sloan smiled and said that the technical details were proprietary, but that the core innovation lay in a novel sequencing logic, and here he paused, choosing his words that allowed incompatible data structures to communicate with integrity and speed. Marcus had written those words. Not words like them, those exact words, in the documentation he had left in Devin Sloan's office 6 weeks before they fired him. He closed the laptop. He sat in the apartment for a long time without moving. Then he called a lawyer. The first lawyer he called listened for 8 minutes and told him, not unkindly, that what he was describing was difficult to prove and expensive to pursue, and that without documentary evidence of prior authorship, a suit against a company with Vantage's legal resources would be inadvisable. The second lawyer said the same thing in fewer words. The third one did not call back. Marcus filed a formal complaint with Vantage's HR department. He wrote it carefully, 3 pages, with dates and a description of the files he had provided to Sloan, and he sent it certified mail and he kept the receipt. The response came 2 weeks later on Vantage letterhead. It thanked him for reaching out. It stated that an internal review had found no evidence to support his claims. It used the phrase disgruntled former employee in the second paragraph, which told him everything he needed to know about how they planned to tell his story. The patent was filed 6 weeks after the press conference. He found it in the public database, which anyone can search. Sloan Tech Compression Engine. Inventors, Devin R. Sloan, Gerald P. Holt. His name was not on it. His name was not anywhere. 3 months after his termination, the Chicago Tribune ran a Sunday feature on Devin Sloan. There was a photograph of him at his desk on the 14th floor, the north-facing window behind him, the river visible in the distance. The headline read, "The Man Who Revolutionized Medical Data." The article described his years of dedication. It quoted colleagues who called him relentless, visionary, brilliant. It quoted Gerald Holt, saying that Devin Sloan was the kind of mind that came along once in a generation. Marcus read the article at the kitchen table. Diane was still there then, but only just he could feel her patience thinning the way you feel a season changing, slowly and then all at once. "What are you going to do?" she asked. He folded the newspaper along its original crease. "I don't know yet," he said. It was the most honest thing he had said in months. He did not know yet. What he knew was the thing he always came back to. The thing that kept him sitting at the kitchen table long after Diane had gone to bed and the city outside had gone quiet. He knew what he had built. He knew every line of the logic, every decision point, every place where he had stayed up until 3 in the morning, choosing the harder, cleaner solution when the easy one would have worked well enough. He knew the work the way you know something you made with your own hands in the dark, when no one was watching, when there was no reason to do it except that the problem would not leave you alone. They could put their names on it. They could not put their understanding in it. And somewhere, in a way he could not yet articulate, he believed that distinction would matter. He just did not know yet how long he would have to wait for it to. He found a lawyer in April. Her name was Sandra Pruitt, and she ran a 2-person practice out of a second-floor office on South Michigan Avenue, above a tax preparation service that was only open 4 months of the year. She was 51, sharp-eyed, and she had the manner of a woman who had spent her career being underestimated and had long since decided to find it useful. She listened to Marcus for an hour without interrupting, and when he was finished, she said she would take the case. "I want to be honest with you about what this looks like," she said. "You have no signed agreement, you have no timestamp on the files you gave Sloan. You have notebooks that you wrote yourself, which any competent opposing counsel will call self-serving. What you have on your side is the technical knowledge and the logic of the sequence of events." She paused. "That's not nothing, but it's not enough yet." "I know," Marcus said. "I'm still looking." "Keep looking," she said. "And Marcus, document everything from this point forward. Every conversation, every date, Every piece of paper. He had already started. The suit was filed in June. Sandra kept the filing fees as low as she could, and Marcus paid her the rest from the savings account he and Diane had been building for 3 years toward a down payment on a house. Diane did not say anything when he told her. She had stopped saying things about the case by then, which was its own kind of answer. Vantage's legal team responded in 30 days. It was a filing of 47 pages, and Marcus read all of it at the kitchen table in one sitting. It described Marcus Webb as a disgruntled former employee with no documented claim to the intellectual property in question, and it requested that the case be dismissed. The judge dismissed it in September. Insufficient evidence of prior authorship, the ruling read. Plaintiff has failed to establish a factual basis for the claim. Marcus sat with the ruling for a long time. Then he filed a notice of intent to appeal. This was when Vantage stopped being patient. 2 weeks after the appeal notice, Marcus received a letter from Vantage's legal team informing him that the company intended to pursue a counterclaim for defamation. The suit alleged that Marcus's public statements, a letter to the editor he had submitted to the Tribune, which the Tribune had not run, and a post on a professional forum that 14 people had read, constituted deliberate and malicious misrepresentation, damaging to the reputations of Devin Sloan and Vantage Technologies. Sandra told him the counterclaim was a tactic. She told him it was designed to cost him money he did not have and attention he could not spare. She told him that the merits of it were thin. She also told him that thin merits had not stopped such things from succeeding before. The counterclaim was settled 8 months later. Marcus did not have the money to fight it to trial, and Sandra could not carry the costs alone, and in the end, he signed a settlement that required him to pay $15,000 and to refrain from making further public statements about Vantage or its employees while litigation was pending. $15,000 was the rest of the savings account. The house was no longer possible. Diane left in November of that year. She did not leave in anger, which in some ways was worse. She left the way a person leaves when they have made up their mind carefully and completely, and there is nothing left to argue about. She sat across from him at the kitchen table where he had read the Tribune article, and she told him that she loved him, and that she believed him, and that she could not keep living inside a fight that was taking everything they had, giving nothing back. You might be right about all of it, she said. I think you are. But Marcus, being right isn't keeping the lights on. He did not try to change her mind. He understood her reasoning the way he understood a mechanism that has been under too much stress for too long clearly, and without judgment, and too late to fix. He moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in South Side in December, 6 blocks from the house where he had grown up. The rent was $640 a month. The radiator knocked, which reminded him of the old apartment, which reminded him of evenings at the kitchen table with the laptop and the notebook, and the problem that would not let him go. He slept on a mattress on the floor for the first 2 months because he could not afford a bed frame and had not gotten around to asking anyone for one. In February, Forbes ran a profile of Devin Sloan. It was 4 pages, with a photograph of Sloan in what the caption called his innovation lab, standing in front of a whiteboard covered in diagrams. The headline was, "The Architect of Modern Medical Data." The article said that Sloan had spent years quietly working on a problem that the industry had given up on. It said the Sloan Tech compression engine had been licensed to 11 hospital networks in 4 states and was projected to generate $40 million in revenue in the coming year. It quoted Sloan saying that the work had consumed him, that he had given up vacations and weekends and a great deal of sleep, and that it had been worth every minute. Marcus's neighbor, a retired postal worker named Eugene, slid the magazine under his door without a note. Marcus read it standing in the kitchen. He read it the way you read something that describes your own life in someone else's handwriting slowly, with the particular nausea of a truth being turned inside out in public. He set it down on the counter. Then he went to the second-hand desk he had bought at the Salvation Army on Cottage Grove Avenue, and he opened his laptop, and he began rebuilding his documentation from the beginning. Not what he remembered, what he could prove. He had the notebooks, he had the personal files on his own hard drive, the original code with its creation dates intact, the draft versions with their revision histories, the early test results he had run on anonymized datasets he had built himself. None of it had a notary stamp. None of it would walk into a courtroom and speak for itself. But it was the architecture of something, and Marcus Webb was a man who knew how to build from a foundation that other people could not yet see. He worked until 2 in the morning. The radiator knocked. Outside, Southside was quiet in the way of neighborhoods that have learned to be quiet at night, and Marcus sat in the small circle of his desk lamp and rebuilt, piece by piece, the record of a thing he had made, that had been taken, that he had not finished fighting for. He did not know yet about Ray Okafor's inbox. He did not know yet about the email that had been sitting there for 3 years, unopened in a folder marked Old Projects, with an attachment that carried a timestamp that predated Devin Sloan's patent application by 14 months. He only knew what he had, and what he had, he was going to know completely. 5 years is a long time to be right about something no one will listen to. Marcus had learned, in those 5 years, the particular discipline of a man who has been broken down to essentials. He had learned which bills could wait 3 days and which could not. He had learned to eat on $11 a day without making it feel like punishment. He had learned to carry himself in a way that did not telegraph the distance between where he was and where he had been, because that distance, once visible, invited a kind of pity that cost more than it gave. He worked nights. The job was security guard at Mercy General Hospital on the South Side, 11 at night until 7 in the morning, 5 nights a week. The pay was $19 an hour, which was enough, and the nights were mostly quiet, which suited him. He walked the corridors on his rounds, the long, fluorescent-lit hallways of a working hospital in the small hours, past the nurses' station on 3, past the supply rooms, past the waiting area on the ground floor, where someone was almost always sitting in the particular stillness of a person who was waiting for news they were not sure they wanted. And he thought, and he kept building. He still had the desk. He still had the laptop. After his rounds ended at 7, and he had taken the bus home and slept until noon, he would sit at the desk for 3 or 4 hours and work on the documentation, refining it, cross-referencing it, building the kind of record that a man builds when he knows he cannot afford to go back to court until the record is airtight. He had learned something else in those 5 years. He had learned patience of a kind that has nothing hopeful in it, which is the hardest kind, not the patience of a man waiting for his luck to turn. The patience of a man who has accepted that luck is not the mechanism at work here, and that the only thing he can control is the quality of what he is preparing, and so he will prepare it as well as it can possibly be prepared, and he will wait, and he will not stop. It was on a Tuesday in March, 5 years and 3 months after he had walked out of Vantage with a cardboard box, that the hospital's data system went down. He was on his second round of the night when it happened. The monitors at the nurse's station on the cardiac floor flickered, and then the screens went the flat gray of a system that has lost its feed, and then the night-charge nurse, a compact woman named Beverly, who had been at Mercy General for 22 years and did not rattle easily, said a single quiet word under her breath that Marcus had never heard her say before. Mercy General had switched to the Vantage platform 8 months earlier. The Sloan Tech compression engine was the backbone of their interdepartmental record system. Marcus had known this since his first week, had walked past the framed press release in the administrator's hallway that announced the partnership, and had felt something go tight in his chest that he had learned to leave alone. The system came back up in 40 minutes, but something did not come back with it. He heard about it first from Beverly, who told the attending physician on the floor in the voice of a woman reporting a fire. 3 patients' cardiac histories had been partially corrupted in the transfer, not lost, but scrambled. The records from 2 patients briefly merged in the system in a way that the software had not flagged as an error, only caught because Beverly had noticed a medication dosage that did not match the chart she had memorized. Marcus stood at the edge of the hallway and listened, and felt his whole body go still. He knew exactly what had happened. There was a specific juncture in the sequencing logic, a decision point he had wrestled with for 2 weeks in the second year of building the algorithm, sitting at the kitchen table at midnight while Diane slept. The easy solution at that juncture would have processed records by intake timestamp alone. Marcus had rejected it because he had seen in his testing that intake timestamps in hospital systems were unreliable, sometimes entered late, sometimes duplicated. He had built a secondary verification layer, a redundancy check that cross-referenced patient identifiers before merging any data streams. It was not a glamorous piece of the work. It was the kind of thing that only mattered when everything else went wrong. But it was load-bearing, and Marcus had known it was load-bearing, and he had built it to hold. What Beverly was describing was a system without that layer. Vantage had deployed the algorithm without it. Either they had not understood why it was there, or they had cut it for speed, or, and this was the thing that settled into him like cold water, they had simply never seen it. Because Devin Sloan had not understood the documentation well enough to know what he was looking at. They had stolen the work and not understood it completely, which meant the thing running in hospitals across 4 states was not quite what Marcus had built. It was the body of it without the bone. He went to the charge desk the following morning before his shift ended, and he asked to speak with the hospital's IT liaison. He was told the liaison was not available. He came back the next evening and asked again. He was directed to a young man in a collared shirt who listened to him for 4 minutes with the expression of someone who was trying to decide whether the security guard talking to him was confused or simply wasting his time. "I understand the system," Marcus said. He kept his voice level. "I can tell you exactly what caused the error on Tuesday, and I can tell you where else in the data pipeline it's likely to occur." The young man looked at his badge. The badge said security in block letters above his name. "I'll pass it along," the young man said. He did not write anything down. Marcus walked home in the gray morning light and sat at his desk and opened his laptop. His hands were steady. He had been here before in every room, in every version of this conversation, and he knew by now that the door was not going to open from the outside. It was 3 days later that his phone rang with a number he had not seen in years. Ray Okafor. Marcus looked at the name on the screen for a moment. Then he answered. "Marcus." Ray's voice was careful in the way of a man who has been thinking about a call for a long time before making it. "I need to tell you something. I should have told you a long time ago, and I didn't, and I've been sitting with that." A pause. "I found something. In my email. An old folder I hadn't opened in years." Marcus said nothing. He waited the way he had learned to wait. "You sent me a file," Ray said. "In 2012. January. Before any of this, a technical summary, an early build. You CC'd me because you wanted a second set of eyes." His voice dropped slightly. "Marcus, the timestamp on that email is the 14th of January 2012. Sloan filed the patent in March of 2013. The room was very quiet. 14 months, Marcus said. 14 months, Ray said. "I have it. It's still there." Marcus closed his eyes. Outside, a bus went past on Cottage Grove. The radiator knocked once and was still. "Ray," he said, "don't delete anything." They met on a Saturday at a diner on 63rd Street that Ray had chosen because it was far enough from the Vantage offices that he was unlikely to see anyone he knew. Marcus got there first. He took a booth near the back, away from the window, and ordered coffee and did not touch it. He watched the door. When Ray came in, Marcus barely recognized him for a half second, not because Ray had changed dramatically, but because the last time Marcus had seen him, they had both been different kinds of men. Ray was 40 now, heavier through the shoulders, with the careful, contained expression of someone who had been managing his own anxiety for a long time and had gotten good at hiding the effort. He slid into the booth across from Marcus and did not take off his coat. "I can't stay long," he said. "I know," Marcus said. Ray put his phone face down on the table, which Marcus understood as a gesture of good faith. He pulled a folded printout from his inside pocket and set it between them. It was the email. Marcus looked at it without touching it. The 14th of January 2012. His own address in the sender field. Ray's in the recipient line. The subject. Early build, looking for a second opinion. Attached. A file named Webb. Compression V03 zip. The timestamp was 11:47 p.m. He remembered that night. He remembered the specific problem he had been working through in the secondary verification layer, and he remembered sending the file to Ray because Ray was the only person at Vantage whose technical judgment he trusted, and he had needed someone to tell him whether the logic held or whether he was too close to it to see the flaw. Ray had replied the next morning with 4 words. "Looks solid to me." It was the most valuable email Marcus had ever received, and he had not known it for 12 years. "The attachment is still there," Ray said. "The original file. I checked. The metadata on the zip shows a creation date of the 9th of January 2012. That's the file you sent me. The actual algorithm. Early build." Marcus nodded slowly. 14 months before the patent filing. 14 months. Ray wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and looked at the table. "Marcus, I need you to understand my situation. Tell me." "I have a mortgage," Ray said. "I have 2 kids. Amara is 12 and Joseph is 9, and their school is not cheap. And my wife has been back at work for 2 years, and we are still." He stopped, pressed his lips together. "I have been at Vantage for 11 years. I am one of 4 black engineers at director level. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what it cost to get there and what it would cost to lose it? Yes, Marcus said. I understand exactly what it cost. Ray looked at him then, the first time he had looked directly at him since he sat down, and something moved across his face that was close to pain. I know you do, he said quietly. That's why I called you. Marcus did not push. He had made a decision before he walked into the diner that he would not push, because Ray was not Devin Sloan, and Ray was not Gerald Holt, and what Ray had done for 12 years was the thing that ordinary people do when they are frightened. He had kept his head down and protected what was his. Marcus could not afford to be angry about it, and more than that, he did not want to be. Ray had called. Ray had come. That was not nothing. I'm not going to tell you what to do, Marcus said. I'm going to tell you what happened to me, and then you can decide. So he told him. Not the version he had told lawyers, stripped down to facts and dates and legal relevance. The whole of it. The apartment, the savings account, Diane, the settlement and the $15,000 and the mattress on the floor, the security guard badge that said security in block letters, the 5 years of desk lamp and documentation, and the particular discipline of a man who has nothing left to protect except the truth of a thing he made. Ray listened without speaking. His coffee went cold. When Marcus finished, the diner had filled up around them and emptied again, and the Saturday morning light had moved across the floor. And Ray sat for a long moment with his eyes on the middle distance. I'm sorry, Ray said. I should have come forward sooner. I told myself I had nothing concrete. I told myself it wasn't my fight. He paused. I knew those were excuses. They were, Marcus said. But you're here now. It was that afternoon, riding the bus back to Southside, that Marcus's phone lit up with a news alert. He read it once. Then he read it again. Vantage Technologies announces $380 million patent sale to MedCore Health Systems. Deal expected to close in 21 days. He sat with the phone in his hand while the bus moved through traffic, and he did the arithmetic that the news alert did not spell out, but that was perfectly clear to anyone who understood what a patent sale meant. Once the Sloan Tech compression engine transferred to MedCore, it would belong to a new entity, a corporation with no connection to Devin Sloan's original filing, no organizational memory of a black engineer who had been fired in January of 2012, and an army of lawyers whose entire job would be to ensure that the asset they had just paid $380 million for was unassailable. 21 days. He called Ray from the bus stop. I saw it, Ray said. He answered on the first ring, which told Marcus he had been waiting for the call. If the sale closes, I know, Ray said. I know what it means. A long silence. The kind of silence that contains a decision being made in real time. Marcus, Ray said finally, what do you need me to do? Marcus looked up at the gray Chicago sky. An L train passed overhead, filling the world briefly with its noise, and then it was gone and the street was quiet again, and he thought about the notebook in his desk drawer and the laptop with its 12 years of documentation, and the email with the timestamp that said the 14th of January 2012 at 11:47 p.m., He thought about 21 days. I need you to be a witness, Marcus said. I need you to tell the truth about what you have and when you got it. That's all. Just the truth. Another silence. Okay, Ray said. It came out steady, which Marcus suspected had cost him something. Okay, I'll do it. Marcus exhaled. The bus came. He got on. 21 days. He had work to do. He filed the suit on day 9, pro se. On his own, without a lawyer, because Sandra Pruitt had closed her practice 2 years earlier and moved to Atlanta to be near her grandchildren, and because every attorney Marcus had contacted in the past week had told him the same thing. The first ones had told him 12 years ago that suing Vantage was expensive, that 21 days was not enough time to prepare, and that pro se litigants in federal patent cases almost never won. He thanked each of them and filed anyway. The clerk at the federal courthouse on Dearborn Street took his paperwork without comment, stamped it, handed him his copies. She had the practice neutrality of a woman who processed 100 filings a week and had learned not to read futures into faces. Marcus thanked her and walked back out into the March wind and took the bus home and sat at his desk and began preparing for the preliminary hearing. He had 12 days. Vantage's legal team filed their response in 4. It was 63 pages, which was 20 pages longer than strictly necessary, and Marcus understood the length as a message, the kind of message that is meant to arrive before the words do. to make a man feel the weight of what is coming before he has read a single line. He read all 63 pages in one evening, with a yellow legal pad beside him, and he made notes in the margins and on the pad, and he did not let himself feel the weight the way they intended. He looked instead for the gaps. There were gaps. There always are, in a document built to overwhelm rather than to answer. The response addressed the timestamp on Ray's email in a single paragraph, arguing that the attachment it referenced was a preliminary sketch bearing no meaningful resemblance to the patented technology. It described Marcus as a disgruntled former employee, pursuing a claim that had already been dismissed once by a court of law. It did not address the hospital incident at Mercy General. It did not address the missing verification layer. It did not address these things because it did not know Marcus knew about them. The preliminary hearing was on a Thursday morning. Marcus arrived 45 minutes early in the suit he had bought at a Goodwill on 47th Street and had taken to a dry cleaner to press. He sat at the plaintiff's table alone, with his documentation in 3 organized folders and his legal pad and a single cup of coffee in a paper cup that he did not drink. Vantage sent 2 lawyers, not their senior partners. Marcus noted this with a quiet attention. They had sent capable people, but junior ones, which told him what they thought of the proceeding. Gerald Holt was not there. Devin Sloan was not there. The message, again without words, was that this was not worth the senior staff's mourning. The judge entered, and the room stood. Her name was Patricia Monroe. She was 63 years old, with close-cropped silver hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and an expression of concentrated intelligence that made the room feel smaller and more honest. She had been on the federal bench for 17 years, and she had the manner of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by what people were willing to do to one another over money. She looked at the plaintiff's table. One man. No counsel. "Mr. Webb," she said, "you're representing yourself today." "Yes, Your Honor." "All right," she said. "Let's proceed." Marcus had prepared his opening statement the way he had once prepared documentation, methodically, without flourish, building from the foundation up. He presented the timeline. He presented Ray's email and the metadata. He presented his own original files with their creation dates. He spoke clearly and without rushing, and he did not use legal language where plain language would do, because he was not performing for the lawyers across the aisle. He was speaking to the judge, and judges, in his experience, respected precision over theater. Then he did the thing he had been waiting 12 years to do. He told Judge Monroe about Mercy General. He described the system failure in March. He described the corrupted cardiac records, the near miss that Beverly had caught by memory. He described, in technical language that was suddenly and completely confident, exactly what had caused it: the missing verification layer, the decision point he had spent 2 weeks on in the winter of 2011, the redundancy check that cross-referenced patient identifiers before merging data streams. "This component," he said, "is documented in my original files dated January 2012. It does not appear in the deployed version of the Sloan Tech compression engine. Not because it was removed later, but because the people who filed the patent did not understand its purpose and therefore did not know it was missing." He set down his notes. "An inventor," he said, "knows every room in the house they built, including the ones that only matter when something goes wrong." The room was quiet. Judge Monroe looked at the Vantage table over her reading glasses. "Counsel," she said, "I'd like Vantage to explain the sequencing logic at the core of the patent, specifically the data verification protocol at the third decision juncture. I'd like Mr. Peeble, Sloan, to explain it, if he's available." The senior of the 2 Vantage lawyers said that Mr. Sloan was not present at today's hearing. "I see," Judge Monroe said. "He'll be at the next one." She scheduled the evidentiary hearing for the following Tuesday. She issued a temporary restraining order on the MedCore sale, pending resolution of the prior authorship claim. She said it in the flat, matter-of-fact tone of a person issuing a routine procedural instruction. But the Vantage lawyers went very still when she said it, in the way of people who have just understood that the morning they expected to coast through has become something else entirely. Marcus kept his face neutral. He wrote the date of the next hearing on his legal pad. His hand was steady. The MedCore deal was frozen. Devin Sloan was coming to court. Marcus gathered his folders. The lead Vantage lawyer caught his eye across the aisle for just a moment, the involuntary glance of a man recalibrating, and then looked away. Marcus did not look away. He held the moment exactly as long as it deserved. Not long, not triumphantly, and just long enough. And then he picked up his things and walked out of the courtroom into the hallway, where the fluorescent light was identical to the hospital corridor light. He had walked for 5 years in the dark, and he allowed himself, alone in that hallway, one slow breath that had something in it he had not felt in a very long time. Not victory, not yet, but the door was open. Devin Sloan arrived at the evidentiary hearing in a charcoal suit that cost more than Marcus's monthly rent, and with the expression of a man who had been assured by his lawyers that this was a formality. He had been wrong to believe them, but he did not know that yet. Judge Monroe had ordered an independent technical review in the 4 days between hearings. The reviewer was a professor of computer science from MIT named Dr. Yolanda Ferris, 61 years old, who had spent 30 years analyzing intellectual property disputes and had the rare quality of being able to explain complex systems to non-technical audiences without condescending to either the system or the audience. She had reviewed Marcus's original files, the deployed algorithm, Ray's email, and the patent documentation over 72 hours, and she had submitted a 12-page report that the court had distributed to both parties the morning of the hearing. Marcus had read it 3 times on the bus. Dr. Ferris's findings were precise and without editorializing, which made them more devastating than any argument could have been. The metadata on the email attachment Ray had preserved showed a file creation date of the 9th of January 2012, 14 months and 6 days before Vantage filed the patent. The core logic of that early build file was, in Dr. Ferris's words, structurally identical to the patented algorithm in all essential respects. The missing verification layer present in Marcus's original and absent from the deployed version was documented in the report with the technical specificity of a surgeon describing a wound. The report did not say Devin Sloan was a thief. It did not need to. Barrett had been replaced. The Vantage table now held 4 lawyers, the senior ones this time, and Gerald Holt sat among them, and he sat the way he always sat, reclined slightly, chin up, the posture of a man accustomed to rooms arranging themselves around his comfort. It was the first time Marcus had been in the same room as Gerald Holt since the press conference he had watched on his laptop 12 years ago, in clothes he had slept in, with a cold cup of coffee beside him. He did not look at Holt for long. He looked at Judge Monroe, because that was where the morning would be decided. Devin Sloan was called to the stand. He settled into the witness chair with a careful ease that Marcus recognized the ease of a man who has rehearsed, who has been prepared by lawyers for every question they anticipated. He answered the first question smoothly. He described his years at Vantage. He described his interest in medical data systems. He used the word passion twice, which Marcus noted. Then Judge Monroe took over the questioning herself. "Mr. Sloan," she said, setting her reading glasses on the bench in front of her, "I'd like you to explain the purpose of the data verification protocol at the 3rd decision juncture of the compression sequence. In your own words, please. Take your time." Sloan's ease did not vanish all at once. It thinned, the way ice thins imperceptibly at first, and then, when the weight finds the weak point, suddenly, "The verification protocol," he said, "ensures data integrity across time. Specifically," Judge Monroe said, "what does it check for, and why at that particular juncture rather than earlier in the sequence?" A silence. "Not long. Long enough. It cross-references," Sloan said. "Patient identifiers. And why at that juncture? What property of the data at that stage makes that the correct placement?" The room was very quiet. Sloan looked at his lawyers. His lawyers looked at the table. "I'd need to consult the technical documentation," Sloan said, "to give you a precise answer." Judge Monroe looked at him for a moment. Then she wrote something on her notepad. "The witness may step down." What happened next, Marcus had not anticipated. Gerald Holt leaned over to his lead counsel and said something in a low voice, and the lawyer shook his head, and Holt said it again. And then Holt stood. "Your Honor," Holt said, "I'd like to address the court." Monroe looked at him over her glasses. "You are not a witness, Mr. Holt. You are a party. Sit down." Hoyt. But his jaw was tight, and his eyes had gone somewhere harder and less certain than they had been when he walked in. And Marcus understood that Gerald Holt had just realized, for possibly the first time, that the hearing was not going the way the lawyers had promised it would. Marcus was called. He walked to the stand, and he laid out the last evidence in the order he had arranged it. The way you lay out tools before a job deliberately, with each piece in its right place. First, the wire-bound notebooks. 4 of them, spanning 2010 to 2012. Dr. Ferris had already authenticated the ink dating. The notebooks showed the algorithm developing in real time, the early dead ends, the rejected approaches, the specific night in November 2011, when the sequencing logic had resolved itself in a margin note that Marcus had circled 3 times and underlined. Second, the photographs, taken on his phone during the development period, of his laptop screen, of handwritten equations on legal pads, of the kitchen table where he had worked. Each photograph carried an embedded timestamp and geolocation, his apartment address in Southside, months before he had ever shown Devin Sloan a single page. Third, the code. He pulled up a specific segment on the laptop the court had permitted him to use, and he walked Judge Monroe through it, line by line, and he explained a decision he had made in one particular function, a seemingly redundant loop that existed for a single edge case he had discovered in testing. An edge case so specific that no one would have written that loop unless they had seen that exact failure mode with their own eyes. This loop, Marcus said, has no explanation in the patent documentation, because the person who filed the patent did not know why it was there. They copied the code, but they did not understand it. He paused. I understand it because I wrote it at 1 of 30 inches the morning in January of 2012, after watching a test run fail in exactly the way that loop was designed to prevent. He looked up from the laptop. An inventor, he said, knows why every line exists. MedCore's representatives, who had been seated in the gallery as observers, left the courtroom during the lunch recess and did not return. Their attorney filed a statement before close of business, confirming that MedCore was suspending the acquisition pending full resolution of the prior authorship claim. $380 million on hold. Sloan did not look at Marcus when court was recessed. He walked out between his lawyers with the careful blankness of a man who has understood that the story he has been telling for 12 years has just been taken apart in public and that no version of the afternoon ahead of him is going to be comfortable. Holt looked. He could not seem to stop himself. As the room emptied, he stood at the table with his lawyers murmuring around him, and he looked across the courtroom at Marcus Webb, packing his folders alone at the plaintiff's table, and what was on his face was not the contempt he had walked in with. It was something closer to recognition. The recognition of a man who has just understood, too late, that he misjudged the weight of what he was standing on. Marcus closed his last folder. He did not return the look. He had not come here for Gerald Holt's recognition. He had come for something older and more exact than that, and he could feel it now, patient and certain, one door away. The ruling came on a Friday morning, 3 weeks after the evidentiary hearing. Marcus was at his desk when his phone rang with the court clerk's number. He had been sitting there since 6, not working, just sitting in the particular stillness of a man who has done everything that can be done and has arrived at the place where doing stops and waiting begins. The coffee beside him had gone cold an hour ago. Outside, Southside was coming awake in its slow Friday way, the L train, the delivery trucks, a child somewhere on the block calling out to another child in a voice that carried clean and clear through the morning air. He answered on the second ring. The clerk read the ruling in the flat procedural voice of someone conveying information rather than news. Marcus listened without writing anything down, because he did not need to write it down. He would remember every word of it without trying, the way you remember the exact quality of light in a room where something important happened. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Marcus A. Webb, on all counts. Prior authorship of the algorithm designated Sloan Tech compression engine has been established by clear and convincing evidence. The patent is hereby invalidated and shall be refiled in the name of the rightful inventor. Vantage Technologies is ordered to pay damages in the amount of $47 million, representing 12 years of revenue derived from the wrongful appropriation of the plaintiff's intellectual property. $47 million. He set the phone down on the desk and sat with his hands in his lap and looked at the wall in front of him, which had a water stain in the upper corner that he had been meaning to report to the landlord for 2 years. He looked at it for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and called Ray Okafor. Ray answered on the first ring, as he always did now. It came, Marcus said. A silence. Then, from Ray's end, the sound of a man exhaling a breath he had been holding for a very long time. All of it? Ray said. All of it. Ray said something after that, and then his voice broke slightly and he stopped saying it, and Marcus waited. And when Ray came back, he said, I'm sorry it took me so long. You came when it mattered, Marcus said. That's what I'll remember. The news moved fast and wide. By midday, the Chicago Tribune had a piece online, and by evening, the story had reached the wire services. Federal court rules against Vantage Technologies in landmark patent case. Black engineer wins $47 million after 1-2-year battle. The following Monday, Devin Sloan resigned from Vantage Technologies. The resignation statement said he was stepping down to pursue other opportunities, which was the language of a man whose lawyers had advised him to say as little as possible for the foreseeable future. The Illinois Attorney General's office announced the same day that it was opening an investigation into potential fraud in the original patent filing. Marcus did not feel what he had expected to feel about Devin Sloan. He had spent 12 years carrying a specific anger toward that man, not a hot anger, but a cold, structural one, the kind that becomes load-bearing over time. Now that it had served its purpose, he found he did not want to hold it anymore. Sloan would face what Sloan would face. Marcus was finished carrying it. Gerald Holt was a different matter, and a longer one. The damages ruling and the MedCorp collapse together had done to Holt what Holt had spent 30 years doing to other people, stripped away the structures that made him feel invulnerable. The stock fell. The board called an emergency meeting. By the end of the month, Holt had been asked to step down as CEO, and he had stepped down. He did not go quietly, in the way of men who have never learned to go quietly. There were lawyers and statements and a period of noise that filled several news cycles. But noise was not the same as power, and Holt's noise did not change anything that had been decided in that courtroom on a Tuesday morning when one man had walked in alone and told the truth about a thing he had built. Marcus went to see Judge Monroe after the ruling. He stood in her chambers, a room of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and afternoon light, and he thanked her, and she looked at him over her reading glasses with the expression of a woman who has been thanked in this room many times and knows the difference between the kinds. "Mr. Webb," she said, "you did the hard part. You kept the evidence. Most people don't." She paused. 12 years is a long time to hold on to something. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "What will you do now?" He had been thinking about the answer to that question since the clerk's call on Friday morning. It was not a complicated answer. It was, in fact, the simplest thing he had known in years. "I'm going to build something," he said. MedCorp reached out the following week, not to acquire the patent, but to license it, directly from Marcus. On terms that Marcus's newly retained attorney described as generous to the point of contrition, Marcus signed the licensing agreement on a Thursday afternoon on the 42nd floor of a building on Michigan Avenue, with Lake Michigan visible through the window behind the desk, gray and enormous and indifferent and beautiful. He signed it with a good pen, and he set it down when he was finished, and looked out at the lake and thought about a kitchen table and a secondhand laptop and a radiator that knocked. Ray was waiting in the lobby when he came down. They walked out onto Michigan Avenue together into an October afternoon that had the particular clarity of a day that has decided to be beautiful without consulting anyone's expectations. And for a while they just walked the way two men walk when there is too much to say, and they have learned finally to trust the silence between them. At the corner of Adams Street, a block from the building where Marcus had spent 4 years of his life, Ray stopped. "You know what I kept thinking about?" Ray said. "All those years, I kept thinking he's going to give up. At some point, he's going to decide it isn't worth it." He looked at Marcus. "How did you not give up?" Marcus thought about the question honestly, the way it deserved. "I didn't give up," he said finally, "because giving up would have meant agreeing with them, and I knew they were wrong." He paused. "That's all it was." "Just that." Ray nodded slowly. They stood a moment longer on the corner of Adams and Michigan, two men in the October light, and then Marcus looked up at the glass tower that had once held everything he thought he wanted and had taken from him the thing he had actually built. And he felt it not bitterness, not triumph, just the clean, complete feeling of a debt that has been paid in full, and a door that has been, at last, put right. Then he turned away from the building and kept walking. 18 months later, Marcus Webb drove to work. This was not, by itself, remarkable. People drive to work every day in Chicago and think nothing of it. But Marcus had not owned a car in 11 years, and the drive took him through Southside, past the bus stop on Cottage Grove, where he had stood on the morning of the ruling and felt the city rearrange itself around him, and past the hospital where he had walked fluorescent corridors at midnight for 5 years in a uniform that said security, and past the diner on 63rd Street, where Ray had sat across from him with his coat still on and slid a folded printout across the table. He noticed all of it. He had made a decision, early on, to keep noticing. Webb Medical Technologies occupied the second and third floors of a building on 47th Street, 6 blocks from the house where Marcus had grown up. He had chosen the location deliberately, which some people in the business press had noted with a mixture of admiration and puzzlement. There were sleeker addresses available, more legible ones to investors and partners, addresses that announced arrival in the language that certain rooms spoke. Marcus had looked at those addresses and chosen this one instead, because the building was solid and the rent was fair, and because he wanted his company to be in the neighborhood that had held him when everything else had let go. The lobby was not grand. It had good light and a clean floor and a front desk staffed by a young woman named Priya, who had graduated from DePaul the previous spring, and whom Marcus had hired because her cover letter had contained, in its second paragraph, a description of a technical problem she had solved during her internship that showed him she thought the way he thought from first principles, without shortcuts. On the wall beside the elevator, framed in plain black, was a single document. It was his termination letter from Vantage Technologies, dated January of 2012. He had found it in a folder in his desk drawer when he was packing up the Southside apartment, and he had stood with it in his hands for a moment, and then he had taken it to a framing shop on 43rd Street and had it matted and framed and hung it himself with a level and 2 screws. Visitors sometimes stopped in front of it. Some of them understood immediately, some asked. When they asked, Marcus told them the short version, and when they wanted the long one, he told them that too, without bitterness and without performance, in the same tone he would use to describe a technical problem and its solution. Because that was what it was. On the third floor, in what Marcus called the engineering room, 12 engineers sat at standing desks with good monitors and better chairs. 8 of them had come from HBCUs. Howard, Spelman, Morehouse, Morgan State recruited by Marcus personally, which meant he had driven to 4 campuses in 6 months and sat in rooms with students who reminded him of himself at 23, certain of their ability and uncertain of their welcome. And he had told them, plainly, that Webb Medical Technologies was a place where the work was the measure. He meant it. They knew he meant it because the work proved it every day. And because Marcus Webb was present in that room in a way that some of the engineers had not experienced in a workplace before, not hovering, not managing, but there at his own desk, building alongside them, reachable, specific in his feedback, slow to speak and careful when he did. The missing verification layer was now in every deployment. Marcus had overseen it personally. He had also written a technical paper, published in a peer-reviewed journal, describing the specific failure mode it prevented, clinical, precise, with no mention of Vantage or the 12 years or any of it. Just the problem and the solution. In the language of people who cared about the problem, Dr. Ferris from MIT had written him a note after reading it. She said it was the clearest explanation of the edge case she had seen and that she planned to use it in her graduate seminar. On a Thursday afternoon in November, a young engineer named Isaiah stopped at Marcus's desk. Isaiah was 24, the newest hire, 3 months in, with the particular combination of brilliance and unsteadiness that Marcus recognized from a long distance. He had come from Howard with a thesis on data integrity systems that Marcus had read in full before the interview. He was going to be very good. He was still learning that he was going to be very good, which was the most interesting phase to watch. "Can I ask you something?" Isaiah said. "Go ahead." Isaiah looked at his hands for a moment, choosing the question carefully, which Marcus appreciated. "Were you ever afraid you were wrong? Like, not about the case, about all of it. The 12 years, were you ever afraid you'd gotten it wrong and you just couldn't see it?" Marcus set down what he was working on. He thought about the question honestly, which it deserved. He thought about a mattress on the floor and a radiator that knocked and a termination letter in a folder in a desk drawer in a diner on 63rd Street and the sound of a phone ringing on a Friday morning when the coffee had gone cold. "Yes," he said, "more than once." Isaiah nodded slowly. "How did you keep going?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I kept going," he said, "because the work was real. I knew every line of it. I knew why every decision existed. And that knowledge," he paused, looking for the right word. "That knowledge was mine in a way that no one could take, even when they took everything else." He looked at Isaiah. "When you build something true, you carry the truth of it in a place they can't reach. That's not nothing. In the long run, that turns out to be most of it." Isaiah looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded once. The small, specific nod of someone who has just been given something they needed and know it. He went back to his desk. Marcus turned to his window. 47th Street was doing what 47th Street did in November, moving. Loud, imperfect, alive. A school bus turned the corner. Two men argued cheerfully in front of the laundromat. An old woman walked with a measured pace that suggested she had been walking this street for 50 years and intended to walk it 50 more. On his desk, beside the laptop, was the wire-bound notebook. Not a new one. The first one, from 2010, its cover soft with handling, its pages filled with the handwriting of a younger man who had not yet learned how long a thing could take. He had kept it through the apartment on South Side and the Goodwill suit and the preliminary hearing and all of it, carrying it the way you carry a thing that is the first record of who you were before the world told you who you were. He opened it to the first page. The first line, written in the winter of 2010 inches, the hand of a 30-year-old engineer who had just identified a problem that would not leave him alone, read, "What if the data could move cleanly?" 4 words, a question. The whole of it, in 4 words, before the answer existed, before the 12 years existed, before any of it. He looked at it a long time. Then he turned to a fresh page, uncapped his pen, and went back to work. There is a kind of knowledge that cannot be stolen, only earned, in the dark, when no one is watching, for no reason except that the problem will not leave you alone. Marcus Webb lost 12 years, a marriage, a home, and every dollar he had saved. What he never lost was the understanding of what he had built, and why every line of it existed. That knowledge was the thing they could not file a patent on. It was the thing that waited, patient and exact, until the world was finally ready to hear it. So here is what I want to leave you with. What is the thing you built? The idea, the work, the truth that someone else has taken credit for, or dismissed, or buried? And what would it mean to keep building anyway? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if Marcus's story stayed with you, if you believe that what a person makes in the dark belongs to them, fully and forever share this with one person who needs to hear it today. And subscribe. Because there are more stories like this one, and every single one of them is waiting for you.